Again, any
Okay, so I'll just share my screen.
wonderful.
It's working okay.
Yes, we can see that.
Great. Okay, so yeah, we changed to heat pump technology for heating. So we actually now use no gas, and it's actually led to a reduction in our energy bills. We do have a lot of solar panels, which I'll maybe move on to next. So the fourth module is really about renewable energy and also the transition to net zero. And here you can see the roof of our clinic. We've really covered every bit of roof space with solar panels. We're actually a net producer of electricity, and over the lifespan of the system, we'll generate about $180,000 worth of free electricity. Okay, so in the renewable energy section, there's a couple of quick wins. So if you are doing your carbon audit and looking at your grid purchase electricity, the quickest way to get to that to zero is to change to a green power accredited provider. So there's carbon neutral power, which is good, but green power is better because green power is from totally renewable sources. Carbon neutral power can be coal power with offsets, which is less than ideal. The other thing in our practice, we had gas heating and reverse cycle aircon for cooling. We simply stopped using gas for heating and then used our reverse cycle for heating. And we don't actually have a battery within the practice, but we do have electric vehicles, and we charge them up during the daytime when most of the year we have surplus solar. And so that's a really good way of making use of battery power without actually having an in-clinic battery. The economics of batteries a few years ago didn't really stack up for us, but the whole environment is changing very quickly with government subsidies, and it's definitely worth investigating it pretty much year on year because it does change. And then with the renewable energy model, we also look at how you can go all the way to being carbon neutral, and we went down that path mainly to find out what was involved. So what's involved in an audit, what are the components of the footprint in a vet practice, and we decided to go with Climate Active, which you can see the little logo in the centre of the sign here, and that's the Australian government accredited scheme. To be part of that, you actually have to buy carbon credits and go carbon neutral. Okay, so the pathway to net zero, and I've just co-authored a paper with 3 other veterinarians and veterinary professionals on a path to net zero, which we received an indication that would be published last week. So that should be out in the next couple of weeks, and so we'll put that on our website. But the process for moving your practice to net zero really starts right here at the start with aligning your team culture with your business strategy. This is the most important. If management is not on board and if your team culture is not right, then it's going to make it hard to sustain the changes needed all the way through to 2050 when ultimately we're aiming to get to net zero. The second process in the pathway there is to set a target, and there's some scientific guidelines in how you set a target, but typically there's a 2030 target and then a 2050 target. The 2030 target is the 5 to 10 year target. So you'll start to, and you hear about that a lot in the media, but you'll start to hear 2035 targets as we approach 2030, it'll move out to 2035. But you really need that midterm target and then ultimately net zero by 2050. So once you set your target, the next step is to measure your footprint. And there are 3 areas that we look at when we're measuring our footprint. Scope 1 is emissions produced on site at the practice. Scope 2 is your power supply, and then Scope 3 is all the emissions that are generated in association with the activities of your practice. Then the next step you can see there is reporting. And reporting, while it may seem obvious, but you can report for different reasons and to different entities. For example, you might just report to the team internally so they know what has worked and what hasn't and how they can make changes. Or you may, bigger organisations may be reporting for government purposes, government auditing purposes. Then once you've measured your footprint and reported it, you then need to implement a reduction program. And so typically your scope 1 and 2. So scope 1 is emissions produced on site, and in a veterinary practice, there's not many of those. There's practices, vehicles owned and operated by the practice. There's isoflurane anesthetic gas. There's escaped refrigeration gases, and then there's natural gas used in heating and hot water. So they're the main components of your scope 1. And scope 2 is your grid purchases of electricity, less any solar inputs. And in scope 3 is everything else. So really your scope 1 and scope 2, you have direct control over those, and they're easy to measure. So that's where it's a good place to start your emissions reduction program. And to that end, within the climate care program, we are now looking at offering a scope 1 and 2 calculator as a year-on-year proposition for practices to start their pathway to net zero. And then the last component, collaborating and celebrating. And look, I think the word collaborate is really critical here. It really, to deal with all the complexity of climate change, is really going to require collaboration up and down the supply chain, collaboration with other industries like the medical profession who are dealing with this problem, and collaborating internationally as well. And then obviously celebrate your wins with the team. And then you can see we go back to realigning with our business culture and strategy. So we'll look at our business strategies, what worked, what didn't, and then go through the process year on year, aiming for reductions each year. I haven't put in carbon credits there. So as I mentioned earlier, to get to net zero, we will need to reduce our emissions as much as possible. And ideally, carbon credits should be really reserved for the last few emissions that are hard to remove. And for the animal healthcare sector, like veterinary profession, carbon credits that restore biodiversity would perhaps be a good match for our industry. And so, as I say, we went through a carbon audit a couple of years ago, and then Annalise's practice at Greater Springfield has also just been through this process recently. So maybe, Annalise, I'll perhaps throw over to you to tell us how you went about that and what were some of the interesting findings.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, so it fell to me to do this audit, and as a clinician, not a business owner, it was a very eye-opening to find out how much goes into a vet clinic. I'm so sorry, I just want to let my dog in because he's bashing at the door and he will make a lot of noise.
I'll just mention while Annalise is away that we used an external consultant to do this, and Annalise has used the same external consultant. If you're going to do all three, scope 1, scope 2, 3, you really need an external consultant, but scope 1 and 2 is much, much easier.
So between our three hospitals for the 2022 calendar year, we emitted 438.5 tonnes of carbon dioxide or equivalent. So it's quite a lot. But what I think was really interesting, like Jeremy said before, it was really like finding out where the emissions came from, which was probably the best part of the exercise. So only 6% were our scope 1. So that's our isoflurane and refrigerants. Scope 2, our electricity is 11.7%. So 2 of our premises have on-site solar, but the 3rd does not, which I'll talk about in a minute. And so the scary part, I think, is that 82.3% comes from our scope 3 emissions, where we have a lot less control. So I guess scope 3 is everything that we buy into the practice, as well as all of the services that we use and all the waste that we generate. And so we are in the process of getting the Climate Active Carbon Neutral certification. So as part of that, we have to produce a 5-year emissions reduction plan, and that becomes a public document that anyone can look at and I guess hold you to. So our emissions plan, from I guess what we thought was realistic given where our emissions come from, was to aim for a 20% reduction in our emissions in a 5-year period. sorry, this slide is a little bit little for everybody, I'm sorry. But our scope 1, you know, our isoflurane is the main area, so we're hoping to halve that in 5 years, and to maintain our refrigerant, so keep up our air conditioning services, keep them running efficiently, and run a minimum number of fridges and freezers, and when we have to replace things, making sure we're getting good quality, energy efficient replacements. Our electricity, so since this has actually been produced, we have changed to green power at 2 of our premises. Our third site, unfortunately, electricity supply is centrally controlled, so we don't get to choose the company. And we also don't, we've lost our bid to put solar on, so we're keeping up that campaign. So hopefully we will get solar at some point, like the numbers make sense, but we just have to keep fighting for that one. And then I guess scope 3, what can you do there? It is a lot more difficult. Obviously, things like reducing waste and reducing consumption. So we have a lot of those things like Jeremy was talking about, preserving things for euthanasias, just trying to reuse as much as we can in practice and use less of things as well. You know, every little bit counts. Like, it might seem silly, but things like, you know, reusing the Coflex that you had your catheter on to use to tie the cotton wool ball on after you've taken it out. Just if we all do lots and lots of little things like that, it does actually add up to a reduction in consumption at the end of the day. But I think the biggest thing, which isn't on our table, but is probably where we all need to go, is advocacy and getting the companies that we all have to use to supply our practices to do something about their emissions. And some of them are, you know, very sort of aware of that, and other companies probably need a bit more advocacy from us. And the procurement module does sort of target that and introduce advocacy to the climate champions.
Great, thanks, Annalise. Yeah, so lots of opportunities there, particularly the scope 1 and 2. I said there's often financial savings in dealing with those, so they're definitely a good place to start. And scope 3 will be a challenge, but as Annalise said, the advocacy and engaging up and down the stakeholders within the supply chain to get everyone from the manufacturer to the distributor to the user to the waste company to all work together to try and find solutions to these. And that's what's worked well in the corporate sector when they try and solve the scope 3 emissions. But I think where that's down the track, scope 1 and 2 is certainly a great place to start. Okay, so now we move on to the 5th module, and looks at buying better products, and also, as Annalise mentioned, how you can influence suppliers to try and deliver better options for you to choose from. Just a couple of easy wins again here. So we've got recycled paper. You can actually get carbon neutral recycled paper, and so that when you do your carbon audit, that becomes a 0 input. And just a little bit about the calculation of the inputs with carbon auditing. They have to do what's called a life cycle analysis, where they audit and find out how much carbon is required to produce, for example, a ream of paper. And so that's fairly widely known because it's a common product. But a lot of the specific veterinary products we have, catheters, drip tubings, bags, no life cycle analysis has been done, so we don't have input values for that. And so there's a different methodology in calculating what the carbon inputs would be for things like that. So obviously carbon neutral paper is better, but even better is to not use paper at all. And so here we have last year our goal was to reduce our use of paper, so we changed to a 0 bookkeeping software and automated all our invoices, and we also changed to hospital patient management system, which was totally paperless. It did take a little while for the team to get used to this. We had to upgrade the Wi-Fi, buy iPads, but now we are much more efficient at admissions. We give much better customer service and delivery of client communications. And now that the team is used to it, it took us probably about 3 months. It's a much, much better system, and we can put drug dose rates into the system and calculate them. and a whole lot of other benefits. And just on the carbon audit too, that there is a carbon value associated with any cloud-based software, because cloud-based software uses a lot of electricity overseas, and you are responsible for a small component of that. Some of the more advanced ones, one that our team really likes there on the left, of course, is freshly ground coffee. We all like our coffee in Melbourne. And of course, there's no pods to dispose of. It's just purely compostable coffee grounds. And then you can see there on the right there, we have a lunch and learn. And part of what Annalise was mentioning about advocating and influencing your suppliers. And there's no better way to get a company to look into what its sustainability credentials are, as if they're going to have to do a 5-minute presentation before the lunch and learn begins when they come to your practice. And you'll be surprised how many companies are actually, particularly the bigger European companies, are already have quite detailed sustainability programs in place. Some others are just starting their journey, and some presenters have had to dig quite deep to find anything. But I guess it's all about making making the companies aware that this is something that we want. And also it helps remind your veterinary team that this is an ongoing issue. And then module 6 is looking at chemicals, toxins and pharmaceuticals. And look, probably the main one in that is, as we've mentioned before, isoflurane. Isoflurane is a potent greenhouse gas. It's about 550 times more potent than carbon dioxide, and we are just freely venting this into the atmosphere with every anaesthetic. In our practice, it represented about 7% of the carbon footprint. And a simple way to start reduction is really just to be careful about your flow rate. So the idea that everything goes on 2% isoflurane and 2 litres per minute oxygen is easy, but in actual fact, it's very wasteful. And so you can start to turn down your flow rates. We have an excellent webinar on our website by Donna White from the Sydney Pain Management Clinic. She's done this webinar on the carbon cost of anaesthesia, and she goes into a whole lot of other details about how you can reduce the use of isoflurane. And I guess our experience has been that probably in the last 6 months, we've really started to focus on this. And we've discovered that by changing our pre-med protocols and looking at our pain management, recoveries, and our monitoring using capnography, we've found that we're delivering much better analgesia. We're reducing patient anxiety. We're using more local anaesthetic nerve blocks, for example, with desexings. And we found we're significantly reducing our isoflurane already. So it'll be interesting to see what the numbers come out next year when we do our carbon audit. Okay, so in summary, I guess the Climate Care program is a great opportunity to position your practice to take advantage of the many opportunities as we transition to a low carbon economy. A long-term culture of sustainability embedded in your team allows them to make a meaningful contribution to dealing with climate change by, as the 2 things I mentioned earlier, firstly, reducing the carbon footprint of your practice, and secondly, inspiring 2/3 of the Australian public who we deal with on a daily basis, who care for their animals, to join our efforts and the shared goal of improving the long-term future of animal health. Okay, that completes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. We have about 2 minutes left for questions. There was a question put in the chat earlier. Is there any way that water conservation is linked to net zero / carbon neutral?
Look, when you do a carbon audit, water is only a very small component of that in terms of affecting the practice, because really the only energy is really in the pumping and filtering of the water. But then sustainability, of course, encompasses water quality and how we use water and how it's discharged into the environment. And particularly if you go back and think about the bedding audit we did, it didn't really do any much for our carbon footprint, but of course we're trying to reduce microfiber plastic pollution into the environment. So the culture of sustainability really encompasses the idea that we should be dumping waste into the environment.
Thank you. Did anyone else have any other questions that they'd like to ask Jeremy or Annalise at this point?
Yeah, Jeremy, how are you going?
Good, Ian. How are you?
I'd just like to congratulate you and your team. That was terrific and very impressive. I'm not really in practice anymore, but I think the veterinary profession's been crying out for something that you guys have come up with. So congratulations. One question: how's the response from your clients?
Yeah, look, that's one of the I guess next challenges on our list is how do we get our clients to share in the achievements we've had. We have a big banner out the front. Now, some clients who I guess are already engaged are really keen and they congratulate, what we're doing. Some clients want to talk about their solar panels and feel as though that they, want to let us know that they're doing something. We do have some life stage boards. I didn't actually get that slide in here, but life stage boards, which we have on every wall in the consult rooms, which look at junior, adult and senior, and now we've added a future board to that, which clients often comment on the things that we put in there about future of animal health, so emissions reduction, that sort of thing. The biggest query I get is people wanting to know about the electric vehicle plugged in outside the practice, so they want to talk about that, so that's fine. I guess it's about trying to find an opening and then having the discussion, and I guess we've had some fairly mild weather over the last couple of years in Melbourne. I suspect if we get some more extreme weather, then it'll come as a topic that will be an opportunity for some of the team to talk about.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Did anyone else have anything they'd like to ask? Or if you put it in the chat, we're happy to ask it for you.
I'll just see if I can find the life stage boards.
Okay. I'd just like to say once again, while Jeremy looks for that, thank you all so much for putting up with the technical issues that we've had tonight. I will be able to edit this masterclass, so it is just uploaded as one big file, and it will be located on our website and our YouTube channel. And in the chat as well, I also have popped the April masterclass that Jeremy was referring to on anesthesia before. If you want to check that out too, that link is there too.
Yeah, so there's
Yeah. Oh, yes.
The life stage boards. Yeah, sorry, Ian.
No, I'm not sure if it's in your recycling module, but we stuck a massive worm farm at the back of the clinic quite a few years ago, and hair and fecal material, food waste, anything that could be digested and turned into worm juice and castings, and that was a terrific way of disposing of that waste. We didn't do a carbon audit on the worm farm though, Jeremy, so I'm not sure about it.
Yeah, very good.
All right. If there's no other questions, we will end this now. But please, if you do come up with something after this ends, which is usually when all my great ideas come in as soon as the talk's over, please feel free to email myself or Jeremy or anyone. You can also get us at info@vfca.org.au. And yeah, or you can reply to the email that I sent you, the emergency link in tonight for the masterclass. But thank you everyone so much for your time. Jeremy and Annalise, you've been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and the wonderful program that is the Client Care Program.
Thank you. Thanks, Claire.
All right, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday evening. Happy Halloween, if that's something you celebrate.